So, the Chicago Manual of Style, 16th edition, is just like the book of Leviticus. It's boring. It's tedious. And it contradicts itself on numerous occasions. It gives you guidelines for grammar, punctuation, how to use names and terms like reverend, saint, pope, rules on numbers, foreign language usage, quotations, and it gives you 2 systems of documentation: author, date, and notes and bibliography. So we're going to look at stuff in that order. And I want to remind writers that the habits you develop now as you're writing your materials will carry over into the rest of your academic careers and your professional publications. So if we develop good sentence structure here, good style, good voice, strong nouns and verbs, proper documentation, and quoting with attribution, then you develop those skills, you will keep doing them. And the earlier you use them in your academic career, the more likely you are to use them correctly. Any questions on any of those? So I edited 2 chapters the other day, and I had a whole bunch of hanging quotes, and I highlighted all of them and said, quotes need attributions. And that is going to cost that writer hours and hours and hours of work.
That's when you say, like, Thomas
Till
Broom says in whatever.
Yes, that's an attribution. A hanging quote is when you just put the quote in without framing it with any language from you. Okay. In Chicago, you always need a title page. Or Larry, you do. Oh. So in Chicago, your title page is made like this. It has your full name. It has the full date of publication. Your date of publication is the date the assignment is due, or in your dissertation's case, the date of your defense is your publication date. Location, St. Thomas University, and it has no page number. Okay, so I gave you this nice example. No hope for the weary. A theological search for meaning. Jonathan Chad wrote, January 8, 2011, St. Thomas University. Okay? All paper should be 8.5 by 11 inch. White paper should not have any binding except for the upper corner, one staple. Yes, Chicago even puts that in the rules. Okay? Everything should be typed and double spaced, including all block quotes. Okay? All titles are done in italics. This is different than APA. And there's, we already did the binding. Okay? For people who are working on a dissertation, you have not only the Chicago Style Manual, but you also have the Dissertation Manual. And the Dissertation Manual has rules that supersede the Chicago. Okay? We in the library like to remind people that dissertation stage students have taken an extra 2 semesters to graduate because of problems with their format. Hi, Kevin.
How are you doing?
So, keep that in mind. For dissertation students, the university library provides that final format check. Okay? This is the final step for you. By or before midterms of the semester you are graduating, which this semester was on February 19th. It is published in the academic calendar giving you the date, and that is a deadline date. That's not the date that you must defend by. It's not the date you must have your committee's approval by. It is the date you must have your committee's approval by, make all changes, and have it turned into the library. Okay? Okay. So the first question I always ask people who are writing in Chicago, do you own a copy of Chicago? If you answer no, then you need to go get one. Okay? Question number 2, are you using author date or are you using notes and bibliography? Because they're completely different. They are as different as MLA and APA are to each other. You only need to use one. All master's level students in the School of Theology and Ministry are required to use notes and bibliography. PhD level students are given the choice. You're doing notes and bibliography. Okay. And why do you think this is important?
Because notes and bibliography starts on page 653.
And because if you know that, it doesn't drive your librarian who's reading your work crazy. And librarians who aren't crazy are more likely to help you more. Okay. Grammar in Chicago has a few different expectations. So grammar, this refers to how you put words together to make sentences. Chicago allows you to turn nouns into verbs, even if they're not in the dictionary. Chicago allows you to end sentences with prepositions. Chicago allows you to use the passive voice, although it is frowned upon. Now, Chicago is very adamant, as is APA and MLA, that you use the present verb tense. So, Augustine. How long has Augustine been dead? Roughly 1,600 years. Our dear friend from North Africa has been dead. Do we write Augustine wrote or Augustine writes? Augustine writes. We use the present verb tense. Grammar rules continue. Chicago allows you to begin sentences with conjunctions. And, or, it even allows you to begin a sentence with however. Okay? One thing Chicago is very adamant about is that you must produce gender-neutral, bias-free language. Chicago gives you 9 methods for achieving gender-neutral language. They are located on page 302. Okay? Now, Chicago does allow you to use they as a singular pronoun. Okay? It does not allow you to use he, she, written either way. Larry, would you like to make a comment here that this makes no sense?
Chicago makes no sense.
It does not.
No matter what you say, there's always an exception somewhere in the Chicago manual for it.
There is. So, punctuation. So we did the biggie on the grammars that are different than probably you were taught in elementary school. Some things that are different on the punctuation for Chicago includes there's only one space after the end punctuation of a sentence, not two. So, if you went to school, when you learned to type on the manual typewriter, as I did, you were taught two spaces with your thumb after you hit period. Okay, gone. We can do a bulk find and replace to correct this problem, but no two spaces after a period now. Also, Chicago says that punctuation should always go inside of the quotation marks. That could be semicolons, that can be commas, that can be periods. This is incorrect. It always goes inside, even though you're not just ending the quotation, you're ending the entire sentence. It always goes inside of the quotation. Okay, Chicago is also adamant that you have to use commas before conjunctions in series of 3 or more. I get so tired of putting in the comma 5,000 times in a dissertation. But Chicago is very adamant about this. Now, because especially PhD students are known to write very long, very complex, very concluded sentences that might or might not make sense. Chicago allows you at times, for the sake of clarity, to use a semicolon in place of a period. So if you had a series of 3 or more items, and then another series of 3 or more items, and then another series of 3 or more items, you would use a semicolon between A, B, and C, and internal commas between. Okay. Chicago is also incredibly picky about hyphens and dashes. There is the hyphen, which is used to separate words. There is the en dash. The en dash are used to connect numbers, such as dates, times, page numbers. It means through. London through Paris. Okay. This is a different key on your keyboard than the hyphen. Okay. Chicago also allows you to use the em dash to set off phrases that are related but different than the sentence you're writing. An em dash would be at the last word, you would add a phrase in, and you would hit dash dash, and then it links together. Okay. A 3 em dash is only used in your bibliography. But what I often hit in bibliographies is that people just put 3 hyphens. It should be one solid line, and there is a keystroke to do it.
What keystroke is that?
I don't know, I have to look up every time.
Shift, hit all the keys on the keyboard.
So, it's a control shift function.
Oh, wow.
I normally just end up putting them in. But you see, that's a hyphen, that's an en dash, that's an em dash, and that's a 3 em dash.
And the dash and the hyphen are not the same keystroke.
Right, they are not.
Is it
The
mandatory?
the hyphen is located on your number bar at the
Right.
top.
I know what
The
the
hyphen, dash for the numbers is on the number pad.
And that does not appear as the same,
According to editors, it does not. I visually cannot see the difference.
well, you can't visually see the difference, then there's no difference.
So,
For the bibliography, is it mandatory to have the 3N dash?
yes. And if you have problems with it, I can fix it in like 20 seconds for your entire 20-page bibliography. Okay? So, I mean, it's boom. We'll fix it. That's easy. Okay? Parentheses and brackets are not the same in Chicago. And since a lot of theological sentences add extra material, they're like a side notes in a play. The author says something off to the side. Extra content. Parentheses and brackets indicate different layers of relatedness. The parentheses are stronger than commas and are used to set off text that has no grammatical relationship to the rest of the sentence. So if you can cover up the clause with your finger and read the sentence and it reads just perfectly, then that clause had no grammatical relationship to the rest of the sentence. And it should be set off with parentheses and not commas. Brackets are used to add a different voice than the original author. So brackets would appear in a quote where you need to make a comment to explain something. So a good thing here would be the author used mankind and you put in brackets people. Chicago also has some very funny rules about possessives. Chicago says that possessive noun that end in S should add an apostrophe S. So, how would you write Moses? M-O-S-E-S S. You don't pronounce it. Yes. You do this for Jesus also.
Why Chicago is horrible.
I fully agree. This is a stupid rule. Okay? Chicago also has a number of rules for non-English names. Those are in sections 8.7 through 8.19. Okay. So Korean, Chinese,
But not Latin.
no. So it tells you what orders to put the names in. Okay. In terms of religion, Chicago has more rules than you want to read. Okay? Names, oh that should be of. Names of gods or alternatives are always capitalized. Holy Spirit is always capitalized. God is always capitalized. Zeus is always capitalized. Thor is always capitalized. Name of a god is always capitalized. Okay? Religious groups, sects, and orders are always capitalized. Franciscans, Dominicans,
Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yes.
Every kind of group, yeah.
every kind of group. Okay, the word church is not capitalized. Even when you're talking about the Church Universal. It's only capitalized when it's used as part of a formal body's name, like Roman Catholic Church, United Church of Christ. Okay? And there are pages and pages of more rules. For example, the rules on titles. In your bibliography, Pope Francis is listed under Francis, not Pope. Francis of Assisi is listed under Francis, not Saint. Okay.
John, I
Yeah.
mean, this is, often, the word church, though, is a distinguishing word in graduate work between, so the uppercase and lowercase is actually inferring a different thing.
Yes, it is.
So in that sense, this rule can't apply, because when you don't capitalize it, you're no longer making the distinction.
Right. So what you would need to do in that
Is
case,
footnote the first time you use it?
first time you use it, provide an informational footnote. Which you can do virtually for anything in Chicago if you want to do an exception for the
For the purposes
rules.
of this paper, the word church, uppercase, will be
Represent,
used to designate
signify.
something. Okay.
That's right, as long as you make a footnote that you say that for the purposes of this paper, the word is not capitalized. Chicago always allows you an out.
Okay. Now, numbers are very different in Chicago than they are in MLA or APA. Chicago tells you to spell out 0 to 100. They're spelled out as words unless they're page numbers, chapters numbers, volume number, legal instruments, or dates, which always use digits. Numbers at the beginning of the sentence are always spelled out also, even if they're over 100. So APA right here is 0 through 9 is always spelled out. Chicago, 0 through 100 are always spelled out. Okay? Chicago has quite a bit of rules on foreign language materials. The consensus in Chicago is the degree that you have to translate foreign language materials is dependent upon the perceived reading ability of your target audience. So if you assume that you are writing this for a population who all knows what that Latin word means, you don't have to translate. Translations may be added after the quote. You can put them in parentheses right after the quote. Or they can appear in a footnote at the bottom of the page. Larry, I might need to buy a clicker for this room. It's annoying to walk all the way up there.
Use your iPad.
That's true, but my daughter has taken it.
You use the library iPad.
The quotations, rules for quotes. Okay, Chicago gives you 29 pages of rules for quotes. I know, it's pages 620 through 649. There are literally over 100 exceptions in these pages. It can drive you batty. Okay? The important thing is quotations always require documentation. You can use SIC to signify, wow, the original author made a mistake, I can't change it, but I can let you know that's not my typo. So sick. Mistake. Chicago says there are two basic types of quotes, and it's determined upon length. Anything less than 100 words is a run-in quote. Anything more than 100 words is a block quote. Block quotes are double-spaced. They always start on a new line. They are always indented, 5 spaces, 1 tab. And they have no quotation marks on them. The changes you are allowed to make to a direct quote are as follows. You're allowed to change double quotes to single quotation marks. You're allowed to change the initial letter to make it lowercase. You are allowed to remove the final period. And you are allowed to change the font or letters, including in very old documents. So like when they used an FF in 17th and 18th century prose, you're allowed to go ahead and change it to the modern equivalent. So this is how you're allowed to change quotes.
Can you go back to the double quotes to single quotation marks?
Yep.
What does that mean?
So, if you're quoting a sentence, you have to stick it in double quotes.
Right.
Within that quote, the author might have the original author might have put a word in quotes.
Okay.
So you're allowed to change his original double quotes, or
To
her,
single quote.
to single.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay. Quotation and ellipses. This is a very common problem. Oh, it is for Chicago. Chicago seems to have more rules on ellipses than MLA and APA combined. The important thing to remember are ellipses are not allowed to change the meaning. If you cut something that fundamentally changes the meaning of the quote, that's a big, big problem. And I found professionally published books that have done this
Donald Trump does it all the time.
all the time. Okay, you do not need to use ellipses before the first word of a quote, even if you begin it mid-sentence. You do not need to use ellipses at the end of a sentence, even if you cut it off before the author's original end. You do need to use ellipses when material has been left out of the quote in the middle. Okay. Chicago allows you to use both footnotes and endnotes. Everyone in here said they were writing in notes and bibliography. So, that means that you will have some footnotes that will be documentation footnotes, and also have some footnotes that are content footnotes. Okay? We all know how to automatically make and not manually put in footnotes. Microsoft Word, references, insert footnote, hit button. Don't put a 1 and then go superscript this. Why do we want to do the automatic? It's easy. It automatically fixes when you insert another footnote between the last two. Chicago does have rules on the length of footnotes. What I do here is when I read a footnote, and I believe that fundamentally the content of that footnote affects how I read the author's text above, so that it fundamentally affects how I'm reading that text above, I make the argument the content of that footnote should mostly be moved into the text. Because we have to remember that many readers skip footnotes. And so if this is that fundamental to your argument, move it out of the footnote and into the body of your text. If it's chasing rabbits, put it down in the bottom. Okay, hanging quotes. Chicago highly frowns upon hanging quotes. that's where you have a quote that's a complete sentence, and you just insert it, and you put quotation marks around it, and you put a footnote on it. But you don't give a signaling or attribution phrase. This is important because the names that you are putting in to your attribution and signaling phrases help build your argument. They help show who you're using, and it gives it extra validity in your argument. If you're making an argument on Christian education and formation, knowing that Thomas Groome said that versus that Jonathan Roach said that makes it much more valid. Because Thomas Groome is a world-renowned scholar in education, Christian education, and has published shelves of books. So that name is an integral part of building your argument. You have the two systems. And if you're using one, do not look at the other. Either use author date or notes and bibliography. Okay? Don't mix them, as many people try to do. Okay? So, notes and bibliography uses footnotes. Okay? It tells you how to use ib. You shouldn't use ib if the footnote carries over onto the next page. You remember that ib is an abbreviation. Don't forget the period after it. I get tired of putting in periods after ib. It's long. It's tedious. No, it's not. Actually, I can do a batch delete. Okay. Superscripted numbers corresponding to the note should be followed by the quote, paraphrase, or reference. And everything that's quoted, paraphrased, or referenced in the body of the paper or dissertation must be included in the bibliography. I corrected a dissertation earlier this week, and the footnotes read Department of Homeland Security. But in the bibliography, it was under the acronym. And my response to the student was, I don't care which you have to use, but it has to get me to the bibliography. They have to match. You always use the acronym, or you always spell it out.
You need to make a footnote to indicate that you're going to use the acronym.
Okay? The fundament and author date, the fundamental difference between Chicago and APA is 1 comma. There is no comma between the author and the year. And the references look completely different. The big thing we have to remember in footnotes for Chicago is the footnote always has the full first name, not initials, and the last name. Whereas the bibliography, last name, first name. This becomes a big problem because a lot of students think that they can copy their footnotes and then just paste them into their bibliography. No, not without a lot of repair work. Okay. All direct quotes should have a page number. Okay? Bibliographies do not have pages unless you're citing a chapter of a book. Okay? Chapters in edited books are one of the biggest problems we have in Chicago bibliographies. And that problem is very often people do not record all the information they need, and then they return the book via interlibrary loan, and you can't tell from the bibliographic record in the library catalog all the information that you need. I made this mistake. I had to overnight buy a book from Amazon to get the bibliographic information I needed for a citation, or I forgot to get the first chapter, the first page and the last page of the chapter, and I couldn't tell from the table of contents. Okay, journals have their format. Okay. The journal title is in italics, not the title of the article. This is the biggest problem that we hit again and again, is many people make these both italics, and they're not both italics. Okay, web pages. Just putting the URL into the footnote is not adequate. Okay? If there's a title, even a corporate title, like St. Thomas University, that's the author. Whatever is at the top of that page is the title. Then you need to give me a last modified date. So if there's any date anywhere on that page that tells us how old that content is, it should be included. Then you should tell me what date if you downloaded it, because content changes. If you're using websites as sources, I strongly recommend that you keep a copy, digital or physical, of the content. Because especially many religious websites disappear, reappear with different content, blog entries get posted and taken down. Okay. DOIs, digital object identifiers. Cite the version that you use in the paper. So if you use a ProQuest Central Online and it has a DOI, you should use the DOI. If you use the paper journal and it doesn't have the DOI, but you know you can get in the database, you don't have to. You're citing what you used, the item in hand. Okay. Any other questions? All right, I did not coordinate with your fashion choices today. I know, Chicago is a very hard style manual, and hopefully by repeated use, you gradually integrate these techniques into your writing. That's what.
If I just say, as a faculty member, it's less likely that there's ever going to be an issue that your comma's in the wrong place. I mean, that's important. But the egregious errors that get people into trouble is not citing it. It's not that you don't cite it correctly, it's you didn't cite it at all. So the real care needs to be in, you can always ask somebody if the footnote is right. You can always come to Jonathan and say, could you just take a quick check at my footnotes? But what he can't do is decide, did you footnote everything you should have footnoted in the paper? Does that make sense? So a style sheet tells you how to cite it, and that's important, but the thing that gets students in trouble is not that they haven't put the comma in the right place. It's that they didn't tell anybody that they took that material from somewhere else, and it's not their own work.
Sometimes when you write something, and okay, we submit our documents, and they go through that thing where they get the percentage of how close it relates to something else.
Right.
Well, I think I'm just writing normal, and they send it back and say, oh, this was taken from here. Now, there might be 4 words from there, and maybe a few words of mine, but they're not really quite the same, but they're pretty close.
Right.
And so that would mean like almost every sentence you'd have to plug in
That's
to
correct.
Google to find out whether it
No, no, no,
exists or
no, no,
not.
no,
So,
no.
I don't know
And
what
that's
to
why there's
do.
an acceptable threshold, you know, if
Right.
20% comes back, I don't even look at it twice. Because 20% of your use is gonna be overlapping words that get used in phrases. But if somebody's giving me a paper that's 47%, something else is at work here. Maybe you don't realize that you just read that article and you think it's your thought.
No,
But if you change a couple words, it's still somebody else's work.
When I first submitted the first one, I get 25%, and then I freaked out. Then they told me it's not that bad. So I tried to figure out what the problems were and make some improvements. And the next one was 11%, and the next one was 0%. But then the fourth one I turned in, I was in such a rush. My sister was visiting. I just threw it together and submitted. I came back with 46%.
Yeah,
And I looked and realized I hadn't cited the site properly. I
Right.
just messed up on how I did it.
Right,
Mhm.
right. But I mean, that's, or people will say, well, I didn't copy it directly, I changed 7 words.
Well, that's cheating.
Well, no, they don't, people aren't doing it on purpose. They're
Oh.
saying, I didn't directly quote it, I paraphrased it, but it's still somebody else's work. So I've never flunked somebody for putting too many footnotes. You only get flunked for putting not enough footnotes.
But then they told me there's a conundrum there in that you can't have so many footnotes if there's very few of your own words in the document.
Well, you have to write a paper, right? You have to write a paper, so it's not just a series of quotations. But a lot of times people make broad generalizations. We had this in class, right? You said, well, it's common knowledge that such and such is true.
Yeah.
And I said, based on whose common knowledge? So I said, go back and find out
Well, that's a
where that
good point.
information came from, right? So that's the thing, is sometimes people say, well, everybody just knows that that's a horse. Well, it looks like a zebra to me, right? So, you know, it might be a horse to somebody else, but it's a zebra to most people. It's, you know, so it's getting in the habit of doing it, but not getting so freaked out by where the period or the comma is.
Yeah, don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining or anything, it's just, it's a new way, it's like anything else, you have to learn a new way of thinking.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't invent it, so it's like not our thing, you know, we're not
You're
the
just
bad
the
guys.
enforcement people.
But this is what standard theological journals
I'm joking.
expect, so that's the thing.
I'm
Quick
just,
question on this font and the spacing in terms of the Publication Manual, the Chicago Manual.
Mhm.
It says that all the font should be the same and the same size. Does that apply to footnotes as well?
No. It should be the same font type. So you're not, if you use New Times Roman in the body, you should use New Times Roman in the footnote. If you're 12 in the body, you should be 10 in the footnote.
And it should default to that word,
Okay. Yeah.
it should default.
Yeah, it does.
The default
Yes.
should
But
be-
it wasn't clear in
Oh,
either, in either place really, because it said all the font and all the typing points should be the same, but it didn't specify if it was, because everything is footnotes too, but it didn't necessarily say not footnotes. And then the second question in terms of the spacing, does that apply, the double spacing, does that apply in between the footnotes as well?
No.
Okay. That wasn't clear.
So, and that's something that you have to undo from Microsoft Word because it will automatically put an extra line after you hit return on a footnote.
Yeah.
So you have to tell it to remove space after paragraph. One of the keys to footnotes is that they look readable visually on the page. So I've emphasized that to many different writers. Well, this footnote has gone on for a page and a half, and it's written in 8-point font. What are you saying to your writer, to your reader? Are you saying that this is unimportant? Well, if it's unimportant, why did you include it? If you need me to know that you're smart, you can probably do that one sentences say. For a full explanation of this, please refer to Bob. Anything else?
Is this on the library website?
Yes.
No. Where is it on the library website?
Okay, so if we go to the library website,
But while you're doing that, Dr. Roach, is it absolutely necessary? I'm a newbie for footnotes. I've
Mhm.
not used footnotes. My confession while I've been here at St. Thomas.
I know because I keep knocking you off for it.
But it's absolutely necessary for us to use footnotes.
The School of Theology and Ministry has uniformly adopted one type of style, which is Chicago Style Manual, 16th edition, notes and bibliography. So yes.
Yes.
Okay, on the library homepage, you go to Research and Citation Guides.
Okay, stupid me,
Okay.
sorry.
Here you have our APA materials.
Yes.
Here you have your MLA materials. And here you have your APA, your Chicago materials. Okay? Anything else? One of the things I do encourage you, if you are writing a dissertation or a long document, don't just leave the Chicago to the last. If you actually start working it at the beginning of the document and learning it as you need it, you actually save yourself time and tears at the end. Which is why on all the papers that are turned in for my classes, I will mark you off up to 5 points on footnotes, 5 points on bibliography, and 5 points on your quoting, and allow you to redo and earn those 15 points back. Even if it takes 3, 4, 5, 6 drafts. Because it's one of our learning outcomes that you master this before you move on. So, don't let it stress you, but learn it. That way I don't have to grade the paper 6 times. It makes me happier. Happy professor equals happy students.
You have more time you can put elsewhere.
Yes, to create, developing new and creative assignments for you. Okay, anything else?
Oh, one last question.
Is
Yeah.
that it?
When I was reading in the Chicago manual, it said that, like encyclopedias and dictionaries and things like that, if you use them, when you quote them in the footnotes, they're not included in the bibliography? Are we following that?
Chicago has statements that seem to indicate both ways on that.
So, just add everything.
I strongly urge,
Absolutely. And then you'll never lose it. And then you'll never lose it, because it'll be that one footnote that when they try to track it down, just double it up on everything, and you can always take it out. But you don't put it in and need it later, just put it all in.
and sometimes, you know, when you're comparing your footnotes and your bibliographies, you suddenly realize, wow, there's a big problem. Like in one, my format checker found that all through the body I referred to Web 2010. And in my bibliographic citation, it said Web 2011. How can I make that boneheaded mistake? So I went and I tracked Web down. It was a dissertation. It was defended in 2010. It was published in 2011.
Oh, man.
The correct date was 2011. It was the publication, not the defense date. So sometimes it's really easy to make these mistakes. And that's the importance of a checker.